Welcome to This Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we're basically putting on our historical detective hats. Seriously, imagine trying to reconstruct the daily lives, the deep beliefs, and the incredible technological achievements of an entire, sprawling ancient civilization. And we're doing it using absolutely nothing but the physical clues they left behind in the dirt. We are talking, of course, about the Harappan civilization, or you might know it as the Indus Valley civilization. It's like this giant ancient puzzle, and today we're going to decode their bricks, their beads, and their bones to bring these people back to life. Okay, let's dive into our investigative docket for today. First, we'll hit the Harappan mystery, then farming and food clues. Third, the master planners of Mohenjo-daro. Fourth, public works and rituals. And finally, burials and luxury goods. All right, kicking things off with part one, the Harappan mystery. So when we talk about this civilization, we are talking about a massive, enigmatic footprint that stretched across parts of modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. But despite that huge scale, it's still shrouded in a lot of mystery. Take a look at the script at the top of this carved stone seal. This little seal, made of a stone called steatite, is actually one of the most distinctive artifacts they left behind. But that writing? Yeah, we literally still cannot read it. It remains completely undeciphered to this day. Because of that, archaeologists have to read the silent, material remains, stuff like houses, pots, tools, just to figure out how these people lived. Before we zoom into the specific clues, let's just ground ourselves in time real quick. This definitely wasn't some fleeting overnight society. Their roots go incredibly deep. The early formative phase goes all the way back to 6000 BCE. Then they hit what we call the mature Harappan, or urban phase, around 2600 BCE. This was their absolute golden age of prosperity and massive cities. And then finally, by 1900 BCE, they enter the late Harappan phase, which is where things slowly begin to decline. And their geographic reach was just as vast as their timeline. Archaeologists have dug up over 2,000 Harappan sites. And to put that into perspective, a staggering 66%, nearly two-thirds of all these settlements, are concentrated right in the Saraswati River basin. The rest are spread out across the Indus Basin, Gujarat, and other spots. That huge concentration tells us right away how heavily these people relied on specific river systems to survive and expand. Moving right along to part two, farming and food clues. Okay, so how on earth do we know what someone ate for dinner like over 4,000 years ago? Without grocery receipts or ancient cookbooks, you have to look really closely at the ground. And the answer here comes from some highly specialized detectives. You've got archaeobotanists looking at tiny charred grains and seeds, while zooarchaeologists study the ancient animal bones. Together, they've found domesticated plant evidence, wheat, barley, chickpeas, alongside animal bones from cattle, sheep, and pigs. They even found wild animal bones like boar, deer, and gharial. Though, to be fair, we aren't entirely sure if the Harappans hunted those themselves or if they just traded with local hunting communities for the meat. But how did they actually farm all this? We don't find a lot of wooden farming tools out there, mostly because, well, wood decays. But we do find things like this. And this is a brilliant example of how experts deduce ancient technology. It's a terracotta toy model of a bull. Finding objects like this little guy, along with terracotta models of plows, lets archaeologists confidently extrapolate that these people used oxen to drag plows through their fields. And that was a major technological leap for producing enough food to feed their massive, growing cities. And when it came time to actually prep that food, they used heavy stone tools like this saddle quern. Now, I absolutely love this detail from the source material. Early archaeologists excavating these sites noticed that these querns looked exactly like the grinding stones that were still being used in modern local kitchens. In fact, back in the 1930s, the excavation team's very own cook actually asked to borrow one of these ancient, priceless artifacts from the site museum just so he could pound herbs and spices for their curries. It is literally the perfect example of using present-day analogies to understand the ancient past. All right, part three, master planners of Mohenjo-daro. So, now that we know they were fed, how did they live? Well, this is where the Harappan civilization truly flexes its muscles. The level of highly structured urban development here is literally unparalleled for its time. You've got to appreciate how deliberately they organized their space. A city like Mohenjo-daro was distinctly divided into two sections. First, you have the citadel. It's physically walled off, built high up on massive mud brick platforms, and it's reserved strictly for special public buildings. Contrast that with the lower town, which is much larger, sits at a lower elevation, but is also walled, making up the sprawling residential areas. This strict separation, it clearly illustrates an unbelievable amount of foresight and a super organized society. To really wrap your head around this planning, just look at this number, 4 million. That is the estimated number of person days of labor required simply to move the earth and build the mud brick foundational platforms for the lower town alone. Think about that. Before a single brick of a single house was ever laid down, an entire workforce was mobilized on a massive scale just to prep the ground. It paints a picture of absolute control, because their building procedure wasn't random at all. It was remarkably fixed. Step 1, construct the massive platforms. Step 2, lay out all the streets and drains in a precise intersecting grid pattern. And then, step 3, only then could houses be built, and they absolutely had to be placed securely along those pre-planned drainage lines. So Mohenjo-Daro wasn't a settlement that just casually grew over time. It was meticulously mapped out before anyone even moved in. And oh my goodness, the drains. Check out this deeply excavated brick-lined drain. Because of their master plan, every single house in Mohenjo-Daro had its own bathroom, completely paved with bricks, and the wastewater connected directly through the house wall out into these sophisticated, covered street channels. It is so impressive that Ernest Mackay, one of the early excavators, actually wrote, "It is certainly the most complete ancient system as yet discovered." Even thousands of years later, these drainage channels were outfitted with sumps for cleaning out debris, which makes them a true marvel of archaeological engineering. Which brings us to Part 4, Public Works and Rituals. So, the streets were clean, the houses were planned. Let's travel back up to the high walls of the citadel to look at clues regarding their communal and maybe even spiritual lives. Up here, we find massive structures meant for the entire community. There's a giant warehouse, though actually only its brick foundations survive today since the upper wooden portions decayed a long, long time ago. But right nearby is the crown jewel, the Great Bath. It's this large, rectangular tank situated right in a courtyard, and the engineering is wild. They made it completely watertight by setting bricks on their edge and sealing them with a mortar of gypsum. Given this super unique construction and the fact that it was surrounded by smaller adjacent bathrooms, scholars strongly suggest this wasn't just some community swimming pool. It was very likely used for special religious ritual bathing. And finally, Part 5, Burials and Luxury Goods. For a final set of clues, we kind of have to look at the end of life. If we don't have written records telling us who the kings or the commoners were, how do we identify social hierarchy? Well, we look at what they took with them to the grave. The crucial point here is how we interpret the really subtle differences in their burials. Generally, the dead were laid out in hollowed-out pits. Sometimes you'll find a pit lined with bricks. They definitely buried their dead with offerings, things like pottery, shell rings, maybe a copper mirror. But here is what's fascinating. Unlike the contemporary Egyptian civilization, which buried pharaohs with literal mountains of gold, the Harappans generally did not bury massive wealth with their dead. So we have to look much closer to spot the VIPs. Because they didn't bury hoards of gold, archaeologists rely on this vital strategy, sorting artifacts into utilitarian versus luxury goods. Utilitarian items are your everyday things, like stone querns or clay pots. But a luxury item, that's something rare, made from non-local materials, or requiring complex technology to produce. For example, tiny pots made of faience. Faience is a material of ground sand mixed with color and gum and then fired, and it was incredibly difficult to make. So finding a faience pot is a huge clue that you're looking at something belonging to an elite individual. We can literally map this out visually. On the one hand, we have heavy copper tools, utilitarian items used for hard, daily labor. But on the other hand, you have delicate, semi-precious jasper beads and microbeads. Crafting those little beads took immense skill and highly specialized drills. By mapping out exactly where these luxury beads are found compared to the common copper tools, we can physically trace the invisible lines of social status and wealth all across their ancient cities. So, we have reconstructed a world of massive, grid-planned cities, complex diets, ritual baths, and subtle social hierarchies, and we did it entirely by listening to the silent stones, bricks, and bones they left behind. But it leaves us with one final thrilling question. If we ever actually decode that Harappan script we saw at the very beginning, how much of our archaeological detective work will be confirmed, and how much is going to be turned completely upside down? It is a profound mystery that still awaits us. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity alive.